we are live, and Pan and Mom and the teachers and this beautiful community has been with us for 79 weeks. So it's cheers to this beautiful community with my garam garam cup of chai from Delhi, and to say that these two little good luck charms of ours have really taken our journey ahead so beautifully. So last week, Pan and his friends were wondering how each one learns differently in the class. And we had a very, very interesting discussion on the learning pace of children, depending on when the child is born. And this week, I have a very, very young, beautiful, vibrant, youngster who, when I spoke to, I thought that one session with her is not enough. And this, Ranjini, is what helps us to, grow a community and welcome people like you on this beautiful platform. So a very warm welcome to you.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So we'll start, as always, we'll start with this little story about yourself. You tell us about what has fascinated me is your qualification. I have loved the way that so I'll talk to you about it after the audience listens to you. So please tell us about yourself. One, what you do, how you were qualified, and also how it helps you. So I'm going to now be quiet and listen to you.
Okay, so I did my bachelor's degree in biology where I studied a lot about how people evolve and how people in societies evolve and change with time. And after that, I did my master's degree from King's College London in neuroscience, where I specialized in cognitive neuroscience. And what that means is, so neuroscience is just anything to do with the brain, the study of the brain. And cognitive neuroscience is, as we know, cognition is thought. So anything to do with, those kinds of like higher level functions, thoughts, certain emotions and things like that, how we deal with a lot of things, kind of why we are the way we are as people, on that sort of a higher cognitive level. And so learning anything, but learning to read also comes under that umbrella, because it's not something that's essential to life, not like breathing or movement. And it's something that is very, very effortful in the beginning. It's not, by the way, I think contrary to popular belief, it's not natural in the sense that, we're not born with some ability to read, and it's not like everyone should be able to do it because you exist as a person. So it's, this very effortful sort of specific process that you build in the brain. So my degree was cognitive neuroscience, where we looked at loads of different things like this, not just reading, but other types of cognition as well. And then I work here at Square Panda at part of the global education and sort of R&D team, where we are a bunch of sort of people from science background, education backgrounds, and we also think about sort of UI, UX and things like that. And what we mainly do is we look at the curriculum and the content of the apps that we build, and how scientific research can inform what we're making. So that, because there are loads of products out there, and there's no dearth of education material, right? All over the world, there's a lot of education material out there. So, but we kind of started thinking about why do a lot of these materials work or not work. And so based on scientific research, what can we definitively say? And so we use that kind of stuff to build our app. And so that's what I'm doing now.
Wow. So the one thing that caught my attention while listening to you is the repetition of the word research, right? So every time we use terms, many times they're just used without really understanding the word. Like we'll talk about stress. I'm stressed.
Yeah.
Like that, these days, everybody talks about two words: learning gap.
Yeah.
We see it happening everywhere. So, suppose I ask you this, that first of all, we should identify what we will call a learning gap.
Hmm. Yeah.
In foundation, what are the basic learning gaps that on both planes, one is that how fearful are we for a gap, for the 2021 gap of the
Hmm.
children not being together, especially in a social environment? And post that, we'll talk of what can be the systems gap in the foundation.
Hmm.
So we'll start with this little fear of describe. First, let's just describe what would we look at as a learning gap when the children come back to school.
Yeah. So I think I completely agree. I think there's like a misconception of like often when people look at kids and maybe they're not able to read something that they're supposed to, or they're not very good at something, and people immediately conclude that, oh, there's a learning gap and you are a victim of the learning gap. But what would that actually mean? I would define it as, there is a readiness level for reading, and there's a level at which you're expected to be at different grades. So there's an expectation that a grade 1 student should be able to read at a certain level. And it's obviously going to be different from what a grade 3 student reads at, and different from what a kindergarten student reads at. And so there's a level like that at each grade. And for me, the learning gap is the fact that if you haven't been to school for a whole year, then now you're in the next grade, but you're still probably at the level of the grade that you last were at. You're not at the second grade level anymore. You're still at first. So for me, that is the 1 year learning gap. But of course, as you said, that assumes that without COVID or without any other issues, learning goes perfectly well all the time and everyone is exactly at the level they should be at. So they couldn't do it for a year. So, oh, too bad. Now they're 1 year behind. And that's not the
Yeah.
case.
So, this is exactly what is worrying me. People were talking about these issues, and I keep looking at them and saying, yeah, but these always existed, didn't they? Because these were ingrained in the system,
Yeah.
which made the system not do things which were, which made children ready. So,
Hmm.
the one thing that I'll ask you to talk about before, you go on to your next step is how important is it for teachers to understand the developmental milestones?
Hmm.
How important is it for any teacher at the foundation level to have a deep understanding of the developmental milestones? And after that, if you can also tell us what all do you see in systems that is actually lacking in
Mhm.
the awareness? So, two
Got it.
questions.
Got it. It's very important to know about the developmental milestones more than anything, just to kind of do right by the child that you're teaching, so that you do not end up forcing the child to do something that they're not ready to do and then become frustrated with them for not being able to do it. And then, and that kind of becomes a vicious cycle. Maybe I'm a bad teacher, maybe they're a bad student, maybe there's something wrong with them. But if just the simple solution of knowing that, right, maybe they're just not there developmentally yet, can sort of help unpack that kind of problem. Uh, the other thing is also that it's important to know the developmental milestones so that you can go in sequence. It's really important to go in order and not to skip steps, because that's how you build mastery for anything, right? So it's really important to know the developmental sort of stages that any child will go through, and it's important to unfortunately, it's important to accept that it will not be very conveniently sort of all kids in your class will not be at the same pace at the same time, which I can understand would make it a little bit more inconvenient as a teacher. It would be great if, as machines, we could all be like, well, 6 years old, this is where everyone is now. Um, but it's important to accept that that's not how people and their brains develop. So that's it. That's why it's very important to know about the developmental goals. And your other question was about sort of the more systemic issues.
Yes,
Uh,
yes.
And I think I'm glad that people are talking about it now, even if it's, just because of COVID, or the talking about it in the form of a 1 year learning gap. But I'm glad that people are at least talking about it a lot now. Just the whole education kind of crisis. Um, if you look at, we have actually a lot of kids in school in this country. There are so many kids enrolled in school, and often when we think about the fact that there's an education crisis, or the fact that there are issues with kids not being able to read English and all of that, we assume that that might be because many people are very poor. Maybe they're not in school, maybe they're not able to afford it, or they're not able to go to school. But that's actually not where the problem is, at least in the sense that we're talking about it. There are many kids in school. Why are those kids who are in school not being able to read? So, and the reason there is because, they might not have a lot of the prerequisite skills that they need to learn the things that they're being taught. And so, there's so much sort of proof that you can see everywhere around you. Like, for anybody that's watching, if you just look at the people around you, you got into the street and talk to the anybody, just absolutely anybody, you find that there's loads of kids that can read English but don't really know the meaning of what they read, or go to school and know ABCD but can't really read, or go to school and say that they go to an English medium school but can't read English, even though maybe they're in third grade or fourth grade. So there's a lot of evidence.
Yes. So it's very interesting now that we're talking about this. There's we have somebody who helps us at home, and I asked her to write, make a list for me from the kitchen, and she just looked at me and said, "I know E and I know ABCD." She wrote it all down for me, and she showed it to me on a piece of paper. She said, "मुझे लिखना आता है." So I said, "चलो लिखो, word लिखो." She said, "वो नहीं आता." So she knew the
Exactly, yeah.
entire Varnmala, she knew the
Mm,
entire A to Z,
yeah,
and but she did not know how to write a word.
that's insane.
So
But yeah.
I actually sat on and I was telling her, so I took out some books, I've taken out flashcards. I said, now let's start building words, let's start. So what you talked about is very relevant because three things. The first one that, we discussed was research.
Mm,
And research takes time. It does not just happen overnight. And research can change every day.
yeah,
There will be different reactions, there'll be
yeah.
different things. So, research for teachers is important. Understanding developmental milestones is important. One, because they understand how much to do and how much not to do.
Mm,
And most beautiful, what you said was they understand the sequence of learning. I
yeah.
think that was very, very beautifully said. Many times when I work with a learning pattern, I realize I know the topic, I
Mm,
know things. But when we interact with somebody who actually is interacting with, the signals of the brain, how the brain functions,
mm,
why a certain thing doesn't happen. So
mm,
I'm going to ask you one question. As if I am a novice, I'm a new teacher, and I'm sitting in front of you,
mhm.
what will you tell me about the brain of this little child?
I would say that, first of all, it's important to realize that learning to read is very hard. The brain of this child is not, unlike speaking or walking or breathing or anything else, the brain of the child is already kind of pre-wired to be able to pick up those activities just from exposure. You can listen to somebody speaking and pick up the language. But when it comes to reading, the brain of this child is not already pre-wired in a way that they're just going to pick it up. In fact, they actually have to retrain a part of their brain and sort of redo the wiring, which is, of course, it's not that they're thinking about it, but it's a very difficult and effortful process when you're learning to read. And we as adults are often very dismissive about it because now that we know how to read, it seems very easy.
Yes.
But for a child, it's actually a difficult process. And so, if we try to sort of make them do something that they're not ready for yet, or if we try to push them into a skill that we think they should have, but it's just they're not developmentally at that stage yet, it's not going to happen, and it's just going to be very frustrating for them and for you. And the reason for that is because their brain is just it's just building the connections yet, so you need to give it the time and the sequence sort of in order to be able to build those wires. And just sort of like a really quick kind of overview of how it happens is we talk a lot about phonics, and you have that written in the background there. And phonics is essentially just really focusing on letter sound relationships. And when you break that down, what that is it's basically to just show something on a piece of paper, or physically or whatever. This is a shape and it makes this sound. That's what you're trying to teach the child. So what, from a brain point of view, what you're trying to do is you want that child's brain to kind of evolve in a way that it makes associations between that shape and that sound, so that the next time it sees that shape, it immediately comes up with that sound, and that's how you can read words, by putting those sounds together. This is not an easy thing to do. So I mean, obviously, it's a whole field, and there's a lot of literature on it. And any teacher who is interested can read about it. There's a lot of really good talks on YouTube as well. By there's someone called, I'm going to butcher their name because my French pronunciation is terrible at this point. But Charles Dehane, and it's spelled Dehaene. And they're a very sort of prominent researcher in this field. There's also Vera Blum-McCandless, who heads our team, who's done some talks that's on there. There's Bruce McCandless. So there's a lot of talks that teachers can listen to that kind of do a deep dive into how all of this works. But yeah, on an overview, that's how.
Now there's going to be another talk they can listen to, yours. And that's what we want to grow,
Yeah.
that I think this whole platform is so that we also want not only a global perspective, but India also has certain very unique features as a country.
Mm. Yeah.
So you've been now a part of this program. You've been also on a global platform. What do you find very unique to India vis-a-vis the other parts of the
Mm.
world?
Yeah.
Or what do you find the same? Both things, if
Hmm.
you can
Hmm.
address and tell us.
So, stuff that is the same, for example, is, and now I'll sort of go a little bit more detailed into what we're talking about. We talked about the importance of having prerequisite skills, and the fact that, the big systemic issue is that we don't build on prerequisite skills, right? Kids will come to school and they'll be like, this is the alphabet, this is how to read this is how to make words, and that's not the way to start. So, to be able to engage with that information, you need a bunch of prerequisite skills like or language skills, vocabulary, and something called phonological awareness. And so, what I kind of focus on more for this session is the bucket of phonological awareness, which means to kind of just process the sounds of a language in your brain, to be able to find patterns of sound in a language, how to break down sounds, how to put together sounds. So at this point, we're not even talking about anything written at all. You don't even know that the alphabet exists. You don't have to know any of that. Phonological awareness is just the awareness of dealing with the sounds of a language. So, what is similar between India and other countries is that generally the way that the brain learns to read is the same for any child reading any language. And it doesn't matter whether you're learning English or you're learning Mandarin or you're learning French or anything. From a brain perspective, it's the same thing. But what is sort of the systemic issue in India specifically, and what is different is the way that the education system is in India. So the fact that in India, most kids will go to school and study English, but at home, they're speaking a different language, right? And with their friends, maybe they're talking Hindi, and at home, maybe they're talking in their mother tongue. And so what is happening is that you're building oral language skills in your home language, because that's the language you're speaking in all the time. And you're building print skills in English because that's what you do in school. And you hardly ever speak in English, and you hardly ever, sort of write in your mother tongue. So there's a bit of a mismatch. We were talking about the sequence of doing things, and the correct sequence would be first you build on oral language skills, phonological awareness, and then go to print, and learning the alphabet and words. So that is sort of an India specific problem where we do both, but we do them in different languages.
Yes.
Um,
I think this is something which I'm going to write in a nice bold note, and I'm going to put it up for all the teachers listening to us,
yeah, I think
because
this is
this
really
is one
important.
of the most relevant, uh, you know, um, issues which we need to be consciously dealing with all the time.
Mm,
Because the children, and what you said is so correctly. Another thing which is going to happen, which we are going to discuss next week, this is for everybody watching, is the way the fonts are done,
yeah.
is the way the scripts are done. So now, and first of all, we are confusing the child with speaking one language and trying to write and read the other
Mm,
language.
mm,
And then when the child is just about accomplishing the reading and writing, we tell them now change the print and go to cursive.
yeah.
So we have confused this little child even further. And this is something which we'll discuss in detail next week. But what Ranjini just said was very relevant. As schools, please be extremely conscious that first the children speak that language fluently, whatever you're going to teach them to write.
Mm,
अगर आप हिंदी बच्चों को लिखवाना चाहते हैं तो हिंदी भाषा का बोलने का उपयोग बिल्कुल सही होना चाहिए. If you're teaching them English, they should be able to speak. They should be able to do both the pronunciation and the diction, the clarity, and the way you speak the word. If that happens, what Ranjini is telling us will work better. Am
yeah.
I right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the NEP that recently came out also targets this. And, I know that it talked about, sort of teaching in the in the mother tongue, and or incorporating at least some oral language in the mother tongue. And that's where it's coming from. And there's actually, there is a solution to this. It's not that children have to do it that way. They can just come to school and do, as you said, they can, you could either have a concerted effort to teach them moral language skills and phonological awareness in English first, or they could do phonological awareness tasks in Hindi or in whatever their language is. They could just continue doing their language and build that properly, and not sort of jump into English. And there's actually research that shows that if you have, like, your first language and you've done all the phonological awareness sort of skill building in that language, you can transfer a lot of those skills into another language. So then you could learn English, and a lot of those skills will be transferred. But right now, we're not working on them at all. And, sort of when I say phonological awareness, I mean, it's not difficult. It sounds like a big word, but it's easy to do. It's just sort of breaking down the sounds of a language. So, when we do activities like rhyming, words that begin with the same sound. If you tell a child that, oh, can you find, bag, bean, and can, which ones start with the same sound? It seems like an easy exercise to us, but for a child, that's difficult to do. And so generally, you'd go from sort of larger unit sizes to smaller unit sizes. What that means is a larger piece of sound like bag or ag to a smaller piece of sound like g. So first you do the rhyming stuff, like bag rhymes with zag.
And
um, and then you'd go into, sort of bag and bean, or bag and big, end with and begin with the same sound. So that's a smaller sort of unit of sound. So that's all that phonological awareness is. It's just kind of being able to break up the different sound patterns, going from really large chunks of sound to smaller chunks of sound. And so you could build that in Hindi or in, whichever language, and then transfer that.
So, this is one thing which uh, I always talk about, but I have never talked about it in relation with the mother tongue.
Mm.
Like whenever we're doing, when we're going to do a phonic training or we're telling people that don't start with phonics. Before you go to
Mm.
phonics, please stop here. But now that you're talking about the mother tongue, why do children respond so beautifully to rhymes?
Yeah, yeah, that's why.
Why do they respond to rhymes? Why do they remember rhymes? So I'm also dealing with a patient who's having some neuro issues, an older person,
Okay.
and it's amazing that for many many weeks when we sung a rhyme to her, and I stopped on the last word, she would fill the last word.
Mm.
82 years old.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
she had started. So that means if the children can do this consciously, mala, kala, in
Mm.
Hindi, it's the
Mm-hmm.
same way. So get the phonological awareness exercises. You were talking about that little bucket of yours.
Mm.
So a few, like you told us one that the rhyming words, then you said alliteration, where
Yeah.
every word, like we used to do that, see, she sells seashells on a
Yeah.
seashore. No, we
Yeah.
used to do Betty bought some butter, but the butter,
Yeah.
and we all remembered it. So if you can do a lot of exercises like that in your mother tongue,
Mm.
you can do it in the most spoken language of your region, and then equip these children to work on the language which is not,
Yeah.
yeah, so the English comes post that. I think this is a
Exactly.
great point. I'm going to make these notes and put them up.
Yeah.
These
All this
words
is
are
doing
very
is just
essential, yeah. And
yeah.
most important, and now also with what you addressed just now, also makes us understand why the NEP says bilingual.
Mm. Yeah.
This one statement that you gave us, that please get the skills in place of the most spoken language of the region and then pick up that skill set and use it for another language.
Mm.
So now people would understand better why these all, this group of researchers told us work with bilingual
Yeah.
approach. You are
Especially
helping
in
us to
Asian
solve a lot of
countries.
problems, young lady.
Yeah, this is true, especially for countries in Asia, not just India, but across Asia. This is, it's, you can't not take it into account.
No, but we have not taken it into
Yeah,
account.
which is why we have a lot of problems now.
Yeah, so we have not taken it into account. And also, what conversation we're having today is also going to help the curriculum developers. I think this whole conversation that we've had today would not only be relevant for teachers, it also would be very relevant for parents.
Hmm.
It would also be very relevant for the curriculum developers.
Yeah.
So I will just, in very short, just before we go to the next segment, I'll just sum it up in Hindi. तो आज हम बात कर रहे हैं कि अगर हम लर्निंग गैप जिसको कहते हैं, हम सब को थोड़ी सी चिंता है कि बच्चे जब वापस आएंगे तो हम बच्चों में थोड़ा सा एक गैप देखेंगे। तो रंजनी हमें कहती है कि गैप तो बच्चों के स्कूल ना आने से होगा, लेकिन जब वो स्कूल आते थे तब भी ये गैप दिखता था। और वो गैप को कम करने के लिए अगर हम अपनी भाषा में, जो अपनी मातृभाषा है, जो बच्चे की, जो आपके रीजन की सबसे कॉमन भाषा है, अगर उसमें आप उनके स्किल्स गतिविधियों के साथ, एक्टिविटीज के साथ डेवलप करते हैं, तो वो भाषा के जो हुनर है, स्किल्स है, वो फिर हम इंग्लिश सिखाने में भी इस्तेमाल कर सकते हैं। तो हम सिर्फ बच्चे का स्किल उठा रहे हैं, वो भाषा कोई भी भाषा सीख सकता है, राइट? तो वो गैप हम ना ही ये 2021 की वजह से देखते हैं, वो हमारे सिस्टम्स में भी इनग्रेन्ड है, तो हम उसकी जरूर कोशिश करेंगे। रंजनी, हम आजकल हिंदी में भी इसको कंसोलिडेट करते हैं, एक इकट्ठा करते हैं,
Yeah, that's
ताकि
better.
हमारे जो टीचर्स हैं, हमारे पेरेंट्स हैं, अब मुझे अगर तीसरी भाषा आती तो मैं उसमें भी बोल सकती, लेकिन मुझे नहीं आती। So thank you so much for this whole and now the way forward. Now suppose as as this researcher, what would you tell us to do as curriculum developers, teachers? What would your
So,
give us that bucket of a process now?
Huh. So I would say that really work on phon- and I'm not gonna sort of just keep repeating the word phonological awareness for no sort of reason at all, but really work on this skill. And the way to do that is by doing these really simple activities with your kids. Mm, Start with sort of uh, picking out patterns of sound that are not difficult, just as as we just talked about, very large patterns of sound. You can do rhyming games. You could say a word and then ask your child or your student to find another word that rhymes with that word. Or and then once they start being able to do that, you can sort of think more about individual sounds. Maybe find words that start with the same sound. By the way, so when we talk about individual sounds within a word, this initial sound or the beginning sound of the word is the easiest to detect. Then comes the last sound of the word, and
And in
then
the
the
middle.
middle. So you can go in that progression. You could be like, you know what? Let's find some words that rhyme with bag. And then they can, come up with a bunch of words. And once they've done that for a little while, you can say, well, what are some other words that start with the sound b? And then you can do some other words that end with the sound g, or have the sound a in the middle. And there's, I mean, these are just examples, but there's so many permutations and combinations in which how you could do these games. And we put out a lot of material like this as well. So just and this is something that parents can do with their kids, teachers can do. It doesn't require a lot of complicated material. You could make a fun sort of physical activity with it. You could do it on an app. You could do it in loads of different ways, and I would recommend using a combination of
Yes.
different ways and not just sort of one thing. So
Yes.
I think that's what the
Yeah, so
recommendation.
this is another thing which I thought just before we kind of wind up is that a lot of parents or teachers may not be equipped. And that is the reason why I have been continuously talking about a combination, what you just said, that don't look at a educational game and feel it's going to be addictive for children
Mhm.
because it will nudge the children in a direction
Yeah.
and it will guide the teacher and the parent to understand the pace and which path to take the children on,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So I have a combination. What you just said, don't get so fearful of exposure because this is also
Yeah.
now suddenly I'm watching parents just slam the digital.
Hmm.
Now suddenly everybody just pulling things away from
Yeah.
children. You're not going to do that, and that's not good for the children. So
Yeah.
look at like when we're talking to a cognitive neuroscientist, these are the kind of people who actually work where there is responsible education happening. They are not people working, just randomly. It's very deep research that goes into this. So please, for parents, teachers watching, balance it. Don't suddenly detach these children from a process which became so strong for 2 years.
Yeah.
Am
And if
I?
you feel that, if you are worried that your child might get addicted to, just looking at the iPad all the time or their phone all the time, you can always make sure that they're having breaks. I mean, I don't think anybody recommends that your child sit on their phone for 5 hours at a
No.
stretch. So, I mean, you could give them breaks and just make sure that and so the thing is, with digital medium, there's a lot that you can't sort of replicate. There's a lot of content that you can't unless you were to personally sit and create all of that. But what you can do is you can use it as a reference point. And if you're worried that your child is on the iPad a lot, what you could do is you could play a game or two on the iPad
Based on
and
that.
then do an extrapolation activity.
Yes, that's a beautiful suggestion. And now preparing for everybody for what's going to come next week. So we have this young researcher coming back to our platform next week, and we are going to be discussing our most favorite topic: upper or lowercase letters. Shall we do print? Shall we do cursive? This is our favorite. This is a question been asked to me for my last 31 years. So next week, I'm really looking forward to this chat with you, and I'm sure a lot of teachers, parents are going to join us. And thank you so, so much for being with us today.
Thank
I
you.
enjoyed every minute of this.
Me too. I really liked it. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Square, square, panda.